earthquake, the major earthquake, which was actually the biggest disaster which has struck India in the last 2-3 decades, that happened on 26 January 2001. I had just joined 1 month earlier. So I'll just try to portray what the situation was almost 3 decades earlier and what is actually happening now, and how we can actually harness technology, especially space technology, for managing disasters. Now, as I can tell, as we had no prior experience in disaster, there was no training on disaster management. So it was a situation where actually when I was standing in the parade ground, almost at 8:15 in the morning, and actually the earthquake happened at 9 a.m. in the morning. So this was actually the safest place. And it was a 100-second earthquake. It was almost like never ending. 100 seconds seems very less, but and the whole earth was shaking, but it was difficult to stand. And I could see all around, almost the entire Bhuj town was collapsing in front of my eyes. Now from that, so there was no prior intimation. Now let me add, for an earthquake, it is unlikely, even with the space technology, we will have any prior intimation for an earthquake. So different disasters will have to be dealt with differently, and we will get different time span of advanced warning, if at all, depending upon the type of disaster we are looking at. And we will get that kind of response time to actually prepare for that impending disaster. Now that was experience which was actually life-changing, because we had no wherewithal. There was no NDMA, there was no NDRF, there was no SDRF, there was no disaster preparedness, there was no contingency plan, there was nothing. So one had to think on one's feet, and was able to do a reasonable job, because I survived till my posting 1.5 years later. And we were able to, as I said, all the decisions had to be taken at that point of time without any preparation or any advance warning. Looking back, now one of the things which one had to do, because Kutch was a very large district. It actually has a 450-kilometer long boundary with Pakistan. Area-wise, now currently it is a 2 district, but it is actually as big as Kerala district. So I almost felt like a DG of a police, not a superintendent of police of a district. So initially, all the resources had to be gathered from within the district, because it was such a large district. So you had a large amount of area. So Kandla port was there, Mundra port was also there, Dalia Air Force Station was there, which had a landing strip, of course, and Bhuj Air Force Base was there. And then the western part, so actually all the communication had also collapsed. Now, why I am mentioning all those things is how we can actually harness space technology for each and every issues which I am actually mentioning. Now, since all communication has collapsed, the VHF communication which we had collapsed, no telephone lines working, mobiles not working. So we had to actually go in for a HF frequency, high frequency actually connectivity, which is a simplex connectivity. So you can only actually transmit or receive at one given point of time. So with the minimal communication which we had, we actually tried to figure or judge what is the different, how severely this earthquake has struck at different places. So after 1 hour of actually trying to get information here, then we could actually feel that the western part is not so badly affected. The central and the eastern part is very badly affected, and then we could actually mobilize resources from those areas which were not so severely affected to redeploy them to areas where actually it was more affected. In those 100 seconds, close to 20,000 people died. 150,000 people were very severely injured. The Bhuj hospital had also collapsed, in which 250 people died, including patients and doctors. So this was actually just giving you a sample of the severity of the situation which was there. And when you had, without any input coming from anywhere, one had to deal with that situation. Now for any disaster, since all of you are disaster professionals, managing disasters, or are in some way involved with managing disasters, you would be aware there are basically 4 stages for any disaster management. The first is the initial period, preparation, if you say, which actually it corresponds with if we are able to predict a disaster, then we can prepare effectively. Now, as I told you earlier, there are times when you can get a good advanced one like a cyclone, where India has done actually very well. There was a time, as in fact some of the speakers have said, there were huge casualties during a cyclone, but now there are almost close to zero. Why? Because of the predictability and the force of the cyclone can be predicted using space technology exceedingly well. So we can prepare, evacuate people and take all sorts of measures because of that. Again, as I said, for an earthquake, even now, we can't predict it. So then we will have to, there is no predictability. Even for floods, there is a large preparation time. So because we know, okay, flood waters are rising, as Dr. Rao had actually pointed out. And so we can predict, depending on the hydrography of the area, where the flood waters will move, and take actually adequate preparations. So in these areas, in certain kind of disasters like floods, cyclone, advanced preparation, which since we get a lot of advanced preparation using space technology, we are able to do it. Now, here, for predicting, the weather satellites are there, which will give a very accurate picture of the weather pattern and how it is likely to pan out. So these are geostationary satellites, so that we will not go there. They will be actually, and hopefully we will be telling you about in the technical session, what are the type of technology is available and how you can actually get useful or important data from those. Now, once this is the second part of any disaster management is the monitoring of the disaster. Once the disaster strikes, then to monitor how. Now, for some disasters, again, like an earthquake, it is like a guillotine. It happens 100 seconds, it is done. So then it is actually post-disaster work which will happen. Some disasters will be like evolving, like cyclone. So the severity will gradually increase. It will reach a very severe stage, and then it will start waning. So then you can actually monitor over a period of time how it is progressing, and one can take actually action depending upon the severity of the disaster at that given point of time. So you can do an initial part, but when the disaster is at its peak, maybe you can't do much. But once it starts waning, then of course, then the additional forces or for rehabilitation or for rescue, etc., can actually start doing work. Another area where we can monitor which is over a large period of time, which is happening now with more frequency and severity, is forest fires. So government is actually very concerned about the forest fire because it has not only it does a lot of environmental damage, but it has life-threatening consequences also. Now it is becoming actually. Another area where actually NDMA has done a lot of good work is regarding after that what was again spoken about and what had happened in Sikkim, the GLOF, GLOF, it is the acronym. So these are the glacier lakes which actually burst. So they have done a lot of good work, and using space technology, they have mapped all those lakes in India which may ultimately result in this kind of a disaster. So they have identified 300. Now they have zeroed down to 30 lakes which are actually at some point of time may do that. In fact, one or two of them are located at Amarnath. So because Amarnath during the Padayatra at Amarnath, it is during the summer. So that's the period when most of the glacial lakes are likely to burst also because of the higher temperatures which because of the climate change we are actually facing at number of places. So as I go, the first area, as I said, is to predict a disaster and make preparatory preparations depending upon the amount of prediction which we can have. The second is the monitoring of a disaster, and of course, it will, as I said, it will depend upon from disaster to disaster what kind of a disaster there is. Now, monitoring, even for monitoring, space technology is very important because now we can actually have using space technology. Even the resolution of 1 meter we can actually get very well. So monitoring becomes very important because our relief efforts are very closely tied up with the monitoring effort. Now, if we know which are the areas which are very severely damaged, what is the kind of damage, so initially, as I said, especially in a disaster, the resources will be very, very, very limited. All the NDRFs and SDRFs, actually, and the army and the paramilitary, they start coming after 12 years, 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, etc. So, at the initial time when maximum resources will be required, the availability of resources will be very, very poor. So, it is imperative, if we have technology, then we can actually allocate the resources at the right spot so as to save the maximum life and actually to prevent maximum damage. If we have infinite resources, then there is no requirement for that, but that is never the case. So, resource allocation during the period of a disaster is of utmost importance, and the incident commander or whoever is the person who is actually in charge or is allocating resources, it is a very, very big and important tool if we have satellite technology which can actually tell us about evolving disaster. Now, the third is after the disaster phase, which may last from 12 hours, 24 hours, 100 seconds, or whatever, depending upon the type of disaster which may have been struck, is the phase of relief, providing relief and rescue phase. So here also, especially in a forest fire or a wildfire, space technology is of actually utmost importance, because we can see how much disaster was there, how much relief has come. For example, in a flood, how is the flood receding? So, which are the areas which we can actually do that? So, even here, space technology is of paramount importance. And the fourth is the long-term rehabilitation measures. Even here again, the space technology is ultimately. Even in the space technology, as I said, for example, in an earthquake or any disaster, the first thing which happens is the communication will fail. There will be no mobile working, phones actually stop working there. If you have a wireless, many of the wireless also doesn't work. But here, the two technology which is there, which is independent of local factors, is the satellite telephone and even your global positioning system. So even for allocating resources, again I tell you, in Bhuj, after the earthquake struck, the first relief flights actually landed from Europe. I was actually very, very surprised. They didn't even come from Gandhinagar, which is in the same state, but they came from Europe. The reason is the communication and the technologies which the European countries had at that point of time, which we did not have. So they knew if such an earthquake of this magnitude has struck Bhuj. This was maybe from the satellites they knew more about the disaster and the destruction which had been brought about by the earthquake rather than us. We were even then actually जैसे हिंदी बोलते हैं हाथ पैर ही मार रहे थे, मतलब trying to figure out what has happened, really happened. They, from using communication, they just wanted us. कि our flight is coming, allow us to land at Bhuj Airport. You give us a place where we can actually park ourselves. We don't require anything from you. We don't even require water. So the only thing we as a superintendent police which I had to do was to give them a place. Yes, आप यहाँ पे use it. So this is what I am telling you, the importance of communication and technology, especially space technology. If one is getting relief from thousands of kilometers away, 5,000 kilometers away, and and the relief from 500 kilometers have not arrived, what is the criticality which is missing? If they have the technology, this technology was not there at that point. So this space technology can actually use a space technology, especially communication, allocating resources and then fixing using GPS कि आपको कहाँ जाना है. So if you are coming from a different area, for example, you don't have to tell him the road number this, block number that, and you are trying to figure out in a disaster area which is this road number and lane number, etc. You just give him a pinpointed GPS location, you have to reach there, and this is the type of thing has happened. If one building has collapsed, 10-story building, 100 people are probably trapped inside that building. The location is this is the place. So you reach there within 10 to 50 meters of that building. In a disaster scene, if you are going to give a ready-made address, the lane number this, house number that, Mr. XYZ house ke piche, he is a very big man, and then you are trying to figure out, you are taking 5 hours time to figure out where to reach. So all this technology has to be harnessed. These are all available. Either with the government of India, where the technology in the last 3 decades has really taken off, or one can even buy this information from various actually commercial satellites which is available, which is actually not too costly even now. Especially as I said, what I want to actually tell you, in all the 4 phases of predicting or planning a disaster, monitoring, actual disaster rescue, and post-disaster mitigation and rehabilitation, in each of those 4 stages, the role of space technology cannot be underestimated. So we have to make use of this technology. How to make technology and what is available will probably be there in the technical sessions here. But having said that, the last thing which I want to tell you about is that in any disaster, no 2 disasters will be same. Even if you are dealing with a cyclone, you forget about it, if 2 cyclones are likely to be same. So ultimately, it is the human component which will determine how well you have been able to plan or respond to a disaster. So ultimately, it is the commander who is taking a decision and who has to think on his or her feet will be able to determine how much we are able to use this space technology to our benefit and to respond to a disaster to the best of one's abilities. So having said that, so this is actually the bottom line. In the end, it is not the machine, but ultimately the man who will be actually making use of the machine who will be superior.